Hi, my name is Cynthia Nunley, and I am doing my project on visual art related to the Harlem Renaissance. I chose this because I've always been interested in Harlem Renaissance, mostly poetry and the jazz music, but looking at this project, it made me appreciate the art just a tad bit more. All right, what is the Harlem Renaissance? Well, it's known as the Negro movement, the rebirth of African American arts. And although it's centered in Harlem, many of the artists were located in Paris, like poets, authors, and musicians. They emerged from the movement. But we're going to focus on artists. What does the Harlem Renaissance represent? It represents racial pride. It uplifts the African American race. It expresses history and it expresses the new lifestyle that African Americans were able to live as free people. And they used art to prove their humanity and demand for equality. All right, with this slide, I just kind of wanted to give an example of everything that we're going to see right now. It's basically a placeholder. We're almost to the main event, but I'm going to speak on notable artists and their artwork during the Harlem Renaissance for the rest of this slide, and I'll explain what makes their work unique. Charles Alston was born in 1907 and he died in 1977. The picture on the left is called Girl in a Red Dress, and it shows the beauty of black people. The other is titled Vaudeville. It was used to represent racial discrimination. Notice how the musician has blackface. Buford Delaney was born in 1901 and he died in 1979. He was most known for his paintings of cityscapes. Notice his use of vivid colors in his paintings. Campfire in the Park is on the left and Green Street is on the right. Interesting fact, Green Street was actually where he lived. Aaron Douglas was born in 1899 and he died in 1979. He's known as the signature artist of the Harlem Renaissance. He exhibited racial pride and in his art, and he represented a lot of historical moments. Aspects of a Negro life is a four-panel mural that tells of the African American journey. Palmer Hayden was born in 1890 and he died in 1973. He was the first American to portray African Americans in his art. He likes to paint based on African American folklore. The two paintings that are being shown to you right now are part of a 12-part series called The Ballad of John Henry. Sergeant Claude Johnson was born in 1888 and he died in 1967. He is of Swedish and Cherokee and African American descent. While his siblings identified as either Cherokee or Swedish, Johnson identified as a black man. In his sculpture Chester, notice the color of the bust and pay attention. Sergeant Claude Johnson was born in 1888 and he died in 1967. He is of Swedish and Cherokee and of African American descent. While his siblings identified as either Cherokee or Swedish, he identified as a black man. Notice the color of the bust in his sculpture Chester. Sergeant Claude Johnson was born in 1888 and died in 1967. He is of Swedish, Cherokee, and African American descent. While his siblings identified as either Cherokee or Swedish, Johnson identified as a black man. Notice the color and the features in his bust titled Chester. You could see his African American pride. Lois Maylou Jones was born in 1905 and died in 1988. She is known as the Grand Dame of African American art. Her paintings depicted what African Americans were going through. Mob Victim shows a man preparing to become lynched. Notice how his hands are tied. He was originally supposed to have a noose around his neck. Jacob Lawrence was born in 1927 and died in 2000. He is most known for his Migration series art. Archibald John Motley, Jr. was born in 1891 and died in 1980. Mending Socks on the left is one of his finest works. It represents race and class. The Octoroon Girl on the right is considered one of his best portraits. Augustus Savage was born in 1892 and died in 1962. She was a sculptor. She sculpted a bust titled Gamin. The boy in Gamin was actually her nephew. The sculpture on the right is titled Lift Every Voice and Sing. It was inspired by the Negro National Anthem. James Vanderzee was born in 1886 and died in 1983. He was a photographer. He took pictures of everyday African Americans. He was also a photographer for the activist Marcus Garvey. On the left is the photograph titled The Barefoot Prophet, and on the right is a photo of middle class African Americans in Harlem. Leslie Garland Bowling was born in 1898 and died in 1955. He was a woodcarver. He was the first black to exhibit at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Here are two of his 7 carvings from the set Days of the Week. On the left is Aunt Monday, and on the right is Cousin Friday. William H. Johnson was born in 1901 and he died in 1970. Many of his paintings are in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. His art is considered folk style with the use of bright and vivid colors. Like many other Harlem Renaissance artists, he depicted everyday life of an African American along with the struggles. Norman Lewis was born in 1909 and died in 1979. He was a member of the abstract expressionism movement. He used a lot of abstract shapes along with vibrant colors in his art. The bonfire on the left is a perfect example, along with Fantasy 2. Prentice Taylor was born in 1907 and died in 1991. He was close friends with poet Langston Hughes and many other Harlem Renaissance artists. On the left, you will see a painting that he painted of African Americans, and on the right is basically a landscape. He didn't really put people in his paintings much. This slide is basically just additional artwork. I just like the use of bright colors and abstract shapes. And also with the portraits, the people weren't exactly realistic, but you could tell the passion that the artist put into their work. And here are some additional sculptures. Um, it was fun doing this project. I got to see a lot of different things, and I got to see a lot of paintings that I've seen in other places, but I just never knew who painted them. And this was just very interesting. The end.